So this is the light box option. This one is by Artograph, and I think it's, don't remember, I think maybe it's 9 by 12, so it gets a pretty standard portrait size picture, which is what I was looking for. They're pretty simple. You just put in a cord, turn them on, or some of them don't have an on-off. They go by the cord. I will link this one from Amazon, which is where I got it. The price was pretty good. There are other places. I think I got it from Amazon. Anyway, there are other brands. There are ones with stronger lights, but this light is pretty strong. There are a lot with less strong lights, and there are also table size ones, and then there are smaller ones. So it really depends on what you need. And the advantage of this is it's like if when you were a kid you ever put a picture you wanted to copy on a bright window. So you would put the picture that you wanted to copy first, and you would put a piece of paper over it, and the bright light shining through the window would allow you to retrace the lines. And this is a much more practical method because you can just turn it on and it works. And I'll show you how it works. It's really bright. So this is from a cartoon that I did sometime in the 90s. And it was a cartoon about two women thinking to themselves, I would give anything for a head of hair like that. So the pictures that I had left of it were really small. And so what I did is I blew up the original picture and I taped it to the light box. And as you can see, it gives you really nice defined lines. And then I put some paper over it. Now I'll talk about paper on this after. But doing that, I was able to basically get the outline that I wanted to get without having to redraw the whole picture. This is kind of a standard art paper, the kind you would find in a sort of generic art notebook, you know, like that you could pick up anywhere, any bookstore, whatever. It's not specifically a great paper, but if you don't need to do any watercolor, you don't need to do anything that's going to be sold to somebody. I mean, this is really fine. It's certainly thick enough for a lot of applications. So where the issue with this is, I usually use a toned paper, darker than this, and as you can see, you get a lot less, you know, you just don't get the same details. So while you could do the outside pretty well, like for me, I'm doing portraits, and you know, likeness is measured in millimeters. So I really want to get the eyes especially in the right position, the eye highlight in the right position, things like that. And that's really difficult on this kind of paper. It does do pretty well on, I think this is Bristol board. And as you can see, you definitely get detail. It's not as strong as the, I don't know if you would be able to tell if I put two different colors here. Hang on a sec. So you can see between the two papers, I think, that this is a much sharper image, whereas this one is definitely seeable, but it doesn't have quite the sharpness. But a lot of people use a light box, and it's a very good option. Depending on the paper you want to use, you can get a really bright light, you can get a whole tabletop desk with it, you can get a smaller surface, and I like this one. This one plugs into the wall. Some of them plug in by USB, and I can't remember how much this one was. I mean, they're not cheap. There are cheap ones, but they tend to not be that bright, and you know, that's kind of the point. I think it was somewhere between $80 and $100. But like I said, I will link it. And that is it for the light box. Okay, this is the method that I use most often. It involves transfer paper. Transfer paper comes in a few different sizes, and black for lighter colored papers and white for darker color papers. I've tried a lot of different brands. There's one in particular I like that I'll link. I find some of them don't transfer really well. Others are hard to erase. And I really do not want the lines when I'm done. So I'm looking for something that's reasonable to erase. And you do this the opposite of a light box. You put the paper that you want to have the final image on the bottom. You put the transfer paper down facing that page, and you put the image that you want to transfer the lines on the top. And basically then all you're doing, and I would do this much more carefully, and you get the lines. So this is a really good method. I have some very dark lines here, darker than I would really want, just for the sake of showing you, but you can use a varying amount of pressure. If you outline everything, you have a very illustrative look, like a coloring book would be, or like a pen and ink drawing would be. So you can definitely use those lines as part of your drawing, or you can do them lighter and erase them for a more realistic drawing. For me, this really works because what I need is precise positioning. So I'm basically getting the outline. Like if I was to do this whole thing, I would basically have the outlines of the underwear, I would have the outlines of the body, and I wouldn't really put in any of the small detail, but you certainly can. And for me, this is a really good and inexpensive method to transfer pictures. You could also, print out a copy of a photograph and, do a photograph. So really, what you want to do with any of these methods is really use your own stuff. You couldn't do this and sell it. That would be somebody else's image. But you can do it on your own photographs. You can, do it for personal use. For me, I'm using other people's photographs, and I am giving them the finished piece. So, that's certainly reasonable. But you can't just take like a famous painting and do that and then sell it as your own, because it's not your own. But this works really well for me. I'll link all the stuff in the bottom. And really, the only thing you want to know about this is if you're doing watercolor on it, you want to erase the lines as much as possible, because once they're wet, they're pretty much set and they're not going to come out. So that's the transfer method. And this is the grid method that a lot of artists use. What you do is put lines. I just drew them on. I didn't use a ruler. You absolutely have to use a ruler on the drawing that you want to reproduce on another piece of paper, and also on the paper you want to reproduce it on. And what this gives you is you know, guidelines about where things should be. So as you can probably see on this picture, the bra is much lower and this goes up much higher. And so with the grids, you have a good reference point on how to fix things. So this really needs to be considerably higher. This really just goes up to the line. Let's see. Need more boobage here. So what you basically get is you get a grid pattern that allows you to have some definitive landmarks. So you can tell when the eyes are in the right place or if one is too high because it doesn't match the other picture. This isn't really a method that I use a lot. It's really good for paintings because if you use like 1-inch squares but your canvas is a lot bigger, you just enlarge the squares based on how big. Like if your canvas was twice as big as this paper, you would make the squares twice as big on the canvas, and then you would have a good point of reference and you could just draw in your basic shapes and be able to draw them. For me, this isn't ideal. I give a lot of the pictures away for free. I don't even charge that much for the ones that I do. So this is very much a copying method rather than a transfer method. I found all of these things. I mean, I knew about all of them, but when I was trying to learn how to do portraits, all of these came up again. There are very few artists that I saw that are doing portraits that don't use some sort of method to help with landmarks. A lot of them also use like drafting calipers. And so what they'll do is they want to know how big an eye is. And so they'll put their calipers down and then they'll move it to their paper, make sure that the shapes are the right size, the spacing between the shapes are the right size, and then something like a grid for something more specific. Depending on, you know, how proficient you are with drawing, this might be hard. I think in the beginning, I think that there's something of involved in muscle memory with drawing and getting the shapes right and getting your hands to do what you see. And I think initially a light box is probably really helpful, and because you actually see the image that you're drawing and the paper. And so you don't have to say, well, that doesn't look like an eye to me. You just follow the shapes and you learn what the different eye shapes are. And they just vary a lot depending on what you're drawing and the body position. And so I think these methods are, like if I was going to do a street scene, I would just do a street scene. If I was going to do a still life, I would probably just do a still life, you know, freehand and fix it along the way. But for something like a portrait where you're trying to get something that's exactly what someone or a dog or, you know, looks like, it's a much more expedient method to learn how to do, and also to do in general. A lot of artists have a lot of different feelings about this, but you know, I'm just not gonna go there with that. I think that people would like to produce something, and to try and not be able to produce it is very frustrating. All of these methods give you an outline and a chance to practice with color and practice with shading and complete something at the end that you're really happy with. You definitely still need to practice other things and get used to seeing things in different ways, and, you know, learn how to do hair. I mean, this really isn't going to help you learn how to do those things, but it will give you a basic foundation drawing that you can work from. And I think it's really valuable, and I think it's a really good way to learn what a nose really looks like, or what teeth really look like, and the face positions and things like that. Because you can certainly draw a face based on common relationships, but that doesn't mean it's going to fit. Very few people are perfectly symmetrical, and very few people are exactly standard with regards to where eyes go and where noses go and things like that. And so I think these are really good methods. If this is something you haven't tried, it is definitely worth trying. And, you know, people can make art they're proud of this way.